Wikipedia defines animation as a method in which figures are manipulated to appear as moving images. Animation is movement and movement is animation, as simple as that. But Japanese animation, aka anime, the thing that we all love and sometimes deeply question ourselves over, has some very interesting ways of handling this movement, and in this video we'll be breaking them down in hopefully an easy to understand way. Yes, this is a more elaborate version of an Instagram post I had made a while back. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. My sense of humor is dry at the moment, and let's get started. The most obvious type of movement is that of the actual characters. Anime follows its characters doing things, so the movement they display during the same is very important. There are many types of character or character related movements. Limited animation is the most commonly used and resource saving approach. Dialogue is generally animated by the mouth flap, which is a looped sequence of frames showing an open and a closed mouth corresponding to the dialogue that is being said by the character. Walking, or in animation terms, the walk cycles are often quite basic, consisting of only a few individual frames in a loop. Sometimes when the moving arms or legs don't need to be shown, it may even be the same frame in different positions. Sometimes walk cycles have more frames and appear more fluid, although these are generally reserved for anime openings, endings, and very impactful scenes. When characters do more than just talking or walking, we enter the realm of character acting. Good character acting is when the characters in question exhibit vivid facial expressions and body language. It's not that common, but it helps the characters feel more like actual people instead of stiffly moving drawings. When it comes to facial expressions, normally the eye is the most expressive part, but when good character acting is present, the emotion is expressed in every part of the face. Good body language often pursues realism with just a touch of the over-the-top anime style. Kyoto animation is the gold standard of character acting, and since most of their shows are slice of life, it is necessary for them as well. It's one of the many reasons as to why shows as simple as K-On! Manages to connect so well with its audience. While talking about character movement, we also need to mention hair and fabric animation. Both are similar, generally having a few frames looped over but occasionally displaying erratic and energetic movement, something that is reserved for the more impactful scenes. Animator Hironori Tanaka, for example, has a unique way of animating hair. Character movements are also accompanied by smears, which are supposed to give you the illusion of motion blur, which is a phenomena that happens when observing movement in the real world. Hold out your arm and move it really fast. Could you catch each individual position your arm was in? No, it appears to be a blur between the initial and the final position. This effect needs to be replicated in animation as well. Thus, the characters go off model with jagged lines or other forms of distortions corresponding with the direction of the movement. Smears are used in both fight scenes as well as in regular movements, and smears with the correct timing is what makes anime scenes appear fluid. Regardless of the scene or the anime, these are elements that constitutes characters and their motion. That about does it for the character movement. Let's now move on, no pun intended. When a character moves, so does the background, and the movement of the background is also crucial and makes the scenes feel more dynamic. Background movements are generally of three types: the sliding background movement, background animation, and CGI backgrounds. The sliding backgrounds are a single illustration which slide up and down and or left and right. These don't require much effort in comparison to the other two techniques and are generally the go-to for most anime. Background animation is when the background moves in all three axes. It actually has depth and tries to replicate real camera work. This is a very resource expensive process and rarely seen in modern anime, and is generally accompanied by the background losing all of its detail and breaking down into a collection of basic shapes, allowing the animator to draw more frames, which can give some viewers a sense of visual whiplash. Personally, I don't mind it at all. When it comes to newer anime, however, background animation is often replaced by 3D backgrounds, which can have the same and sometimes even more complicated camera work while also retaining the detail and texture, something 2D background animation is generally incapable of. Both these techniques have their own charms and positives. There's also the stock backgrounds, where it is just colors and lines moving in a specific direction. Not much to mention there. So far, we have talked about the character and the background movements. One would assume that's all there is, but you would be incorrect. When you combine the character and background movements in a specific way, you get the dynamic camera movement. Now, you may know this, but there isn't an actual camera in animation. All the quote camera work you see in an anime happens to be animation presented in a way to replicate actual camera movement. The dynamic camera work is generally done with a 3D background and a character that can either be CGI or hand-drawn or 2D traced over CGI. You'll see a lot of this technique being used in Attack on Titan and a few other Studio Wit shows, as well as pretty much every Ufotable anime. It's an uncommon style which is even rarely done well. Wit Studios' Vinland Saga, for example, fell victim to the misuse of the dynamic camera, often fully reverting to subpar CGI models to allow this movement to occur. Another type of movement worth noting is that of the effects. The explosions, the winds, the fluids are all moving in their own ways. Fluids like blood or other liquids resemble resemble real life, and since they are mostly hand-drawn, there isn't a physics engine that can be used for it. It's purely up to the imagination of the animator, but they generally try their best to replicate real life. Different animators have different ways of animating explosions and flames. However, animator Satoshi Sakai did some very realistic explosions on Attack on Titan Season 4, while explosions by animator Nozomu Abe for the Fate series are heavily exaggerated and not very realistic. Both still look absolutely stunning. You can find flames that move like real life, and you can find flames like this one here, which is literally liquid animation colored like flames. Smoke in anime tends to move like real life, while the winds are greatly exaggerated to get the impact across. These are all different styles that are possible only in animation, where the pursuit of realism is not that important. Anime also has creative ways of animating the debris movement. Most of you may be familiar with the iconic cubic debris popularized by animator Yutaka Nakamura. It's not quite the same thing as Yutapon cubes, as there is the whole thing about the timing and stuff, but let's not get into that fiasco here. Another thing that anime does a lot is what I like to call implied movement, which happens when there is no actual movement on screen, but it's implied that there is. In this sequence here, you can find a ton of movement, but these two cuts here is what I am talking about. You know that Levi is going downwards with great speed, closing in on Zeke's Snape, but this cut here has no actual movement aside from some fabric and hair animation, which also is looped. The next cut doesn't even have that. It's a single drawing, only having speed lines to convey the movement. Thus, there's no actual movement, but rather motion is implied and your brain fills in the blanks. You can often find still frames with lines pointing in the direction of the motion as opposed to actual motion in anime. A bulk of shows relies on this style as it's a resource-saving approach. There is another type of movement that is very important to talk about, especially now. That is the movement of CGI models. And this is very different from CGI backgrounds. In most cases, you can spot the CGI model thanks to its awkward style of moving, which tends to stand out from its surroundings in a negative way. These are rendered models that remain consistent for the entire scene. Naturally, they don't have smears, which are literal distortions, as the dimensions and anatomy of the model is fixed and doesn't change with every scene. Sometimes the anime team will go and add smears to it, such as in One Punch Man Season 2, but that's rare. In most cases, they will substitute the smears by adding actual blur. Anime normally is 24 FPS, but most scenes are done on 2s or 3s, meaning 2 or 3 of the same frame, making the essential frame rate 12 and 8 respectively. However, the CGI model will move at 24 FPS, which obviously causes a sense of visual whiplash, when everything around the CGI model moves with a lower frame rate. Thus, frames are often skipped and removed from the model to adjust its frame rate to be the same as its 2D surroundings, which is a technique that makes the movement of the model less awkward. Of course, anime still has a long way to go when it comes to integrating CGI models in an otherwise 2D anime. And while we are talking about all type of movements in anime, we might as well mention this: impact frame movements. Now, impact frames are supposed to emphasize the action being carried out. It's not meant to convey actual movement. But of course, some animators, the likes of Yutaka Nakamura, did it anyway, because why not? This style is of course very rarely done, which just about sums it up. Anime is produced in an extremely short amount of time, thus many different time-conserving approaches need to be taken. And so you may notice that a lot of movement in anime is looped and also relies on still frames. But this does have its own charm, and at this point it's essentially one of the things that defines anime from a visual point of view. So that was it. Did you learn a bit listening to me nerding out over animation? Make sure to comment down below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and until next time.